Hello everyone, it's Melanie here with Vintage Shield Studio. I'm so glad you dropped by today. I will be making a card using watercolors, masking, and an embossed image, and this is what it will look like. So first of all, I'm using this Unity Stamp Company Maria Girl stamp set and this 140-pound watercolor paper. Now your watercolor paper, this 140-pound with 300 GSM, is a very textured watercolor paper. If you notice, you've got texture on one side and it's smooth on the back side. Now I'm going to be using the smooth side, especially when I am stamping and embossing. Here are the supplies used for heat embossing. I'll have all of this on my card blog. You can pop over there and see that. So again, I recommend using a stamping platform. This is Tonic Studio stamping platform. It has one side for clear stamps and one for rubber stamps. And the Unity Stamp Company is some wonderful red rubber stamps. They just make beautiful images. And I'll get that placed down on my watercolor panel, which I cut down to 4.5 by 6.5 inches. So again, using the angel image and the sentiment that came in that set, I will come over with my Versamark watermark ink. This is a clear sticky ink. It is specifically used for embossing, heat embossing. Straightening my sentiment there a little bit. Again, I like using the stamping platform. I will prep it with my anti-static powder tool. This comes in so handy when trying to stamp an image on some porous paper like watercolor paper, because I can stamp as many times as necessary and my paper will not move until I'm ready to move on here. Now I think you can barely see that watermark ink, but as soon as I add my gold embossing powder, you will see this start to come to life. So here is that beautiful image and sentiment. I'll just return my embossing powder right back into the container and move on to the heating element. Now I like to use a Marvy heat tool. This is like a blow dryer, but it is a little more condensed heat. And you can see that it starts to melt this embossing powder. As soon as it becomes shiny, you know that your powder has been melted. And I'll hold this up to the light for you in just a few minutes here and give you a close-up look at this beautiful sheen you get when using this gold embossing powder. I'll hit it from the back a little bit to prevent some of that warping. And there is our stamped and embossed image. Next, I have created some masks. Now I've used Post-it tape, but you can also get some masking paper, anything that's just a little bit sticky. You can see these have been used before. Once I make my mask, which I simply stamp onto this masking or Post-it paper, and then I cut it out by hand. These are reusable for many times until they just get too limp to reuse. Now I'm simply taking a hard board and some painter's masking tape. If it's right off the roll, like these pieces I'm using here, I like to rub it over my hands or arms, and the natural oil in your skin will keep the tape from being too sticky. You don't want to tear your watercolor panel later when you remove this from your board. So again, just a simple little swipe over your skin makes it adhere very well, but not so much that it will tear your paper. Okay, I've got that down. The reason for doing that is when you move on to your watercoloring, you don't want your paper to curl up and warp. So here are my watercolor supplies. Those are also listed on my blog. Now simply bring over a water dropper and add that to 2 colors. I'm keeping this very simple using a blue and a green. And I let that sit on those watercolor cakes just for a few minutes, and then I'll take the brush that came in the palette and stir those around to activate each one of those watercolor cakes. And then I'll move right over to the clear palette that comes with the set and get my colors moving around there, adding the amount of water that I'd like to have in each one of those wells. Okay, then I clean my brush in between colors just so I don't cross-contaminate them. And again, I'll bring it over to that clear piece over there on the left, just to work with the consistency that I want to use for my background here. Alright, so the next thing to do is get that brush cleaned up. And then I'm going to move on to that bigger, the wider watercolor brush that I have, and I will wet down my watercolor paper. Now I'm not concerned that my water isn't exactly clean, it's not going to matter. Now when you move on to your watercolor paper, you don't want to oversaturate it. You just want to slightly wet it. You can see the paper will start absorbing the water, but it will leave a little bit of sheen on your paper. Again, I'm working on the smooth side, not the highly textured side, so it's not going to move the watercolor paper as well as it would if I were working from the more textured side. So I'll have to use my brush here with a little more water and get this to move around simply by lightly brushing up to that masked area. Now you can see I don't have an abundance of water on this watercolor paper, just enough to move and blend my colors. So I'm starting here with that bluish shade in the top, and then I'll move on to the green shade down towards the bottom, and I will bring them up where they meet just in order to blend them together. Now the color looks a little bit vibrant, but as you know, if you ever worked with watercolors, as it dries, it will dry back a couple of shades lighter. So just keep that in mind as you're working on your image here, on your background. Okay, I'm about done with that. That's how simple that is. Adding in a little bit more color, knowing that it's going to dry back lighter. Now you can set that aside to dry, or you can bring over your heat tool to speed it up a little bit. I'm going to speed it up today just for the video. I want to get that as dry as possible because the next step is adding some paint splatters. Now I'll go back to that palette that I just used, and I'm going to pick up some more of those watercolors in the blue and the green just for my splatters. Getting that mixed up on that little brush that came with the set. It doesn't matter if it's a great brush or not, we're just doing splatters here. And the reason you want your background dry is because if you were to splatter this over the wet background, your splatters would just bloom, meaning they would ooze out and not leave this concentrated color of splatters. So that's why you want to make sure your background is dry before you do your splatters. Now I'm ready to remove my tape. You can see it's not tearing my paper, which is a good thing. That's what you want. And then I'll get that removed from my board and move on to taking off those masks and revealing the beautiful heat embossed images beneath. And they really stand out. That's why you want to mask your image right there. Alright, that pretty much finishes the front panel of our card. I think there is beauty in the simplicity, and I just simply added that to a solid mat and then put both of those on a 5x7 inch card. Here's the inside of my card and the finished card with a lined envelope. I hope you enjoyed this video today and that you will be inspired to give it a little try using watercolors and masks. The opportunities for all different types of cards are limitless. Please give it a try. Feel free to subscribe. I hope to see you next week, and happy crafting, everyone.